here in celebration of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month by featuring Charles, who's a Vassar grad of 1992, and the co-founder of the one and only one general interest publishing company, Third State Books, dedicated exclusively to AANHPI writers and stories. Thank you, and welcome everybody to this session. We're going to start right out, Charles, by asking you to share about your background, maybe your childhood, family, where you grew up, your journey to Vassar, and how the heck you decided to co-found Third State Books in what seems like a risky industry in the middle of a pandemic.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your support. I was born in Seoul in Korea in 1970. And in 1978, we moved to the United States. I was just a couple months shy of 8. I have an identical twin who also went to Vassar. We had the same double major, lived together for 3 out of 4 years, all that good stuff. But we moved to the States and grew up in Maine, basically the only Brown family within like 50 miles. In terms of how we got to Vassar, I don't think we had heard of Vassar. I mean, my mom, worked menial jobs as someone who didn't speak English and brought 3 kids by herself to this country at the age of 32. We didn't have anyone here to say, oh, you should really think about the 7 sisters, or you should apply to the Ivies. And if you're going to do that, you should study for the SATs, and you should do this and you should do that. We didn't really have anyone to model for us what it meant to apply to colleges. I remember receiving a brochure from Vassar in the mail and thinking, wow, this is a really pretty campus. We almost went to West Point. My brother and I both got our nominations from Senator George Mitchell for West Point, and we almost went. I remember the day very clearly. We had our envelopes and, we were going to mail them in. And I remember we were crying, and my mom said, why are you guys crying? And I said, well, we don't want to go there, but we know that it would be free and they would pay us to go. And that's the only reason why we're going. And she said, well, then if you don't want to go, please don't go. So we visited a bunch of different places. And the minute that we drove through the gate onto the Vassar campus, we just knew that we were home. And so we decided we're going to go to Vassar instead. That's how we chose Vassar. Vassar also made it possible for us to go. They gave us basically full scholarships to go. And so there were a lot of reasons to go. Vassar also had an Asian American admitted students weekend in April of our senior year. We came and met so many students who looked like us. And that also was a great impetus for us to come. And we knew that we would feel comfortable. From the moment that we walked on campus, nobody cared that we were very, very working class. No one cared that we weren't born in America. No one really cared that our mom was a waitress. Everyone on campus, from Francis Ferguson, the president at the time, to every single person, all the students, all the faculty, everybody treated us as if we were full members of this community. One of the reasons why I like to volunteer and to give back as much as I can with Vassar is because of how, we felt accepted, fully accepted into the Vassar community. I did a Fulbright in France. Both my brother and I were double majors, French and Asian studies. We did Asian studies because we wanted to learn more about our background and our heritage and our history. And we did French because we were just in love with the French language, French books, French films. I applied for a Fulbright, went to France for a year, came back, and I landed in New York. I chose to go to NYU to do a PhD program in French literature, hated every minute of it. Was used to knowing everyone on campus and just felt like a number when I was at NYU. And I was offered a part-time job at a literary agency, which was run by the French Ministry of Culture, representing French publishers, for English language translation rights. And then they offered me a full-time job as a as an agent, not as an assistant level, but as a real agent. And so I decided to make the jump from grad school to publishing. That was 30 long, hard years ago. And I worked with French publishers and then went into literary fiction and nonfiction editorial, worked in museums. I was editor-in-chief at one of the Smithsonian museums for 9 years, ran the publishing program at the Museum of Modern Art for 6 years, and then went to go work at a literary agency called Serendipity, which is the largest agency in America representing writers of color. About 85 to 90% of the books that we sold every year were sold to the big five conglomerates. 75% of all books sold in America are published by the big five conglomerates. Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, HarperCollins, Macmillan, and Hachette. And in the four and a half years that I worked there as the senior agent, it was our job to know all the different houses, what they published, who bought what, etc. I had seen the dearth of Asian American representation in publishing as far back as, when I first entered the industry. But there it really became crystal clear to me that Asian Americans were just severely lacking representation at the highest levels of publishing. And I wanted to do something about it. And I happened to meet some folks from Silicon Valley who were interested in publishing, but didn't want to do what traditional publishing traditionally did. And so we started having conversations that lasted about a year, what they call founder dating in Silicon Valley. After about a year or so, we incorporated in December 2022, and we officially launched with a feature about us in Publishers Weekly in January 2023. Our first book was published in February of this year, our second book in March. Our third book was published just this Tuesday, yesterday, and our fourth book is coming out on June 4th. We have another 3 books coming out in 2024. We have 9 books coming out in 2025, and it's kind of crazy that we are the only publisher in not just America, but also Canada. Canada's 19% Asian ancestry. And yet there are no publishers in Canada, and there were, until Third State, there were no publishers in all of America. $26 billion a year worth of books are sold every single year in the US, and there was not one publisher. And the statistic that I give everyone is that, we're 7% of the US population, and we're the fastest growing ethnic group. African Americans are 14% of the population, so roughly double the population of Asian Americans. And there are over 125 independent publishers and imprints within the big five conglomerates that publish majority or exclusively African American writers. And so if it were proportional, we would have about 62 or 63.
Wow.
And the fact that when I started Third State, there were none. I mean, I couldn't believe that there were none, but there were none.
Charles, can I ask you, what makes Third State Books approachable, unique, real? Tell us about your company's vision and philosophy and values. What makes it a special publishing company?
That's a good question, but before I dive into the answers, I'd like to pose a question to the folks that have joined today. What is your impression? What is your impression of the publishing industry, specifically as it relates to Asian Americans? What do you think the place of Asian Americans is within the current publishing landscape? And your answer might be, I have no idea, or I think Asian Americans are doing well. I think Asian Americans are doing poorly, but please let me know.
Well, let me just start out and say, I have no idea. I mean, but if you're the only Asian publishing company, I would think we are not doing that well.
Right. Anyone else? Delia?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I read a lot, and I do feel like there is more now than, it was like 15, like 20 years ago. I'm not in the publishing world, so I don't know as much about what's happening behind the scenes. But I think from my perspective as a book consumer, like reader of books, it's great to see romance novels with, written featuring Asian American, characters. There's mysteries, there's sci-fi, so it feels like there's more than there was, but I don't know what that says about what else is still not being surfaced. So I think this is like really fascinating to me because I love to read, but I don't know all the different things going on behind the scenes in terms of publishing. There's a comment from Tanya also.
Yes, Tanya
in the
says,
chat.
like many industries, there are a few rock stars and many others are not supported. And I think that is a very astute observation about the publishing industry generally, but especially as it relates to Asian Americans. Everyone's heard of Crying in H Mart, everyone's heard of Pachinko, everyone's heard of American Born Chinese. And we see these stories, either they become films or TV shows, they become bestsellers. And so we see them on our social media feeds and we think, okay, there's some Asian American representation there. And according to PEN America, about 7% of books published are written by Asian Americans. Books published by the traditional publishing industry are written by Asian Americans. So in terms of, Asian Americans as authors, we're not severely underrepresented. But the problem is that, when you have Asian American authors and you have Asian American or just readers generally, there's an entire industry that is not built with us in mind, that is supposed to act as a conduit between Asian American writers and all readers, not just Asian American readers, but all readers. But every step of the way, there are, rather than facilitating that connection between authors and readers, there are obstacles that are placed. So I'll give you an example. The big five publishing houses, they basically don't accept books that are submitted to them that are not represented by a literary agent. So if you're an Asian American writer, you basically have to have an agent if you're going to be taken seriously by the big five conglomerates. And the conglomerates are five companies, but within each company, there are, as many as 100 or somewhere between a dozen and 100 different sort of editorial imprints. The estimates are there are about 350 different mini houses under the big five umbrella. And you can count on one hand the number of editors that actually accept unagented manuscripts. So you have to have an agent, but 95% of agents don't accept unsolicited manuscripts. You have to know someone in that agency, or that agency has to reach out to you in order for you to get representation. Also, 98% of literary agencies are owned by white folks. And then when they submit to the editors who acquire the books, in the big five, 85% of editors are white. And so you have literary agents who are 85% white, 98% owned by white folks that are submitting to 85% white editors. And most of this is happening in New York City. All five publishing houses are headquartered in New York. New York City is 76% non-white, and yet almost 9 out of 10 people who are buying the books, who are judging whether someone is good enough to be published or not, are white. That is not by accident, that is on purpose, right? And then even if you have an editor who may be Asian American, or you have an agent that's Asian American, you have 85 to 90% of directors of publicity and marketing who determine how much money, how many marketing dollars you're going to get. They are 85 to 90% white. And then as they submit your book for reviews, reviews are really, really important. Surveys show that a book that is reviewed by either Library Journal or Kirkus Reviews, your trade reviewers, is 700% more likely to enter the collection of a library or to be put on the shelf of a bookstore. So you have to get reviews if your book is going to succeed in the marketplace. 88% of book reviewers are white. 80+% of librarians and booksellers are white. And so through the entire chain in this industry, from the time that you write a manuscript to the time that that manuscript becomes a book and a reader picks up that book, that entire industry is so lily white that it's hard for Asian American writers or African American writers or people from marginalized communities who have historically had low engagement with publishing. It's really, really hard for them to not be put into boxes, to be able to tell their authentic truths, and to have every single person along the way say, this is the story that you should tell, and we're going to support you 100% to write this. And this happens with both adult books and with children's books.
A lot of publishing companies might publish your book, but they do not help with marketing and promoting the book. What's Third State do that's different in that area?
Yes. So Third State's different in a few different ways. We are distributed by Ingram, which is the largest independent distributor in the world. Our books get sold to 45,000 national accounts across North America. So we have great distribution as if we were a traditional publisher. But one thing that we're doing is we are investing our marketing and promotional dollars into publishers. So let's say a Big Five publisher gives you $50,000 as an advance, right? If you have to pay your agent's commission, you've already paid 15%. With the money left over, a lot of times you have to pay for your own publicists, you have to pay for your own promotion, you might even have to pay for your own advertising because the publisher won't do it. And so they will never tell you and be transparent about how much money they will actually spend on marketing and promotion. I've never known a publisher that actually revealed to an author how much money they spent. And what we do is in all of our author contracts, we guarantee that whatever the external production costs are going to be, so that's what we pay the author, what we pay to design the book, what we pay to print the book, what we pay for editorial, etc. Whatever that amount is, we're going to take a minimum of 25% of that and devote it to marketing and promotion. And agents don't like it because agents don't get a commission on the amount of money that we are guaranteeing to their authors. But authors love it because they can see, in fact, they work with us very closely to understand how we do marketing and how we do promotion. And there are some things that the publishing industry does well. There are other things that it doesn't do so well. For instance, reaching Asian American media. We have partnered with a company called NextShark, which is the largest Asian American media outlet. And they've actually taken an equity stake in Third State, and they are helping to promote all of our books. And they get about 60 million social engagements per month on Instagram alone. So we have a ready-made Asian American audience that finds out about our books very easily through repeated posts and promotions and ads and editorial stories, through NextShark, through Asian Hustle Network, through Gold House, through different Asian American media outlets that basically have little to no contact with traditional publishers. What traditional publishers will do is they will go to Minjin Lee and they will say, okay, Minjin, can you get us some Asian American media? And so she goes to the CEOs and founders of these media companies and says, hey, can you do a story for me? Hey, can you run an ad for me? Hey, can you do a promo for me? And can you do it for free? Because the publishers refuse to pay. When we first met NextShark, they told us that in 10 years of existence, they had never had a publisher spend a single dollar promoting an Asian American writer. And they had never had a Hollywood studio spend a single dollar promoting an Asian American directed or starred film. Ironically, they have offered money for non-Asian American starring or directed films. They've offered money for Hollywood films that star other people because they want to reach the Asian American audience. But when it comes to an Asian American film, they think that the director and the actors and everyone should be able to bring these national media outlets and get attention for free.
Wow, that's stunning.
It's a little crazy.
Yeah, yes. Questions or comments do you have from Charles, or what's your reflection on what Charles has said so far?
I'm just, how has the response been, and how, like, what what are you receiving from authors in terms of how they're feeling about finally having a space to represent?
The response has just been overwhelming. We've had more attention than any small fledgling independent publishing house has a right to get. I mean, we just were offered a 4-page wraparound of Publishers Weekly for the first week of Asian American Heritage Month. We were able to put our logo out there, and that goes out to the entire industry so that we could really make a statement about who we were. We've been able to sign books that we have no business signing, considering who we are. We have, for instance, we have a book we just signed, an author named Tien Ho. He is the DA of Sacramento.
Mm.
And he was the lead prosecutor of the Golden State Killer and put the Golden State Killer behind bars. And he could get $1 million advance from any Big Five publisher to be able to tell that story. The only major book that has come out about the Golden State Killer was written by a woman named Michelle McNamara, who's the late wife of Patton Oswalt. And she, as a journalist, had investigated the story. She passed away before she was ever able to identify the killer. But she sold 1 million copies of this book called I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which was her obsession with the Golden State Killer. And so that story in the publishing industry is huge. And this is the first book that is going to provide the definitive inside account of how he was pursued, caught, and then prosecuted. And he found out that we existed and just basically passed on all the Big Five houses so that he could be published with us. And we got him for pennies on the dollar. And on top of that, he gave us TV and film rights. We have another book that was offered on by Viking and by Knopf, a book called LA Coroner. And LA Coroner is about Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who was the chief medical examiner of LA County from the 1960s through the early 1980s, and thus did the autopsies of every single famous person that died in Hollywood, the 60s through 1982, including Robert F. Kennedy, Marilyn Monroe, Natalie Wood, all 9 Manson family murders, Janis Joplin, John Belushi, William Holden, I mean, you name it. He did their autopsies. And the woman who wrote the book got offers from these very, very prestigious Big Five houses, but they were all like, you know what, let's get rid of the Japanese guy. We just want a book on celebrity deaths. And in the meantime, this guy, he revolutionized forensic science. He was the inspiration for the show Quincy, and starring Jack Klugman in the late 70s and early 80s. Of course, they didn't cast an Asian American, they cast a white guy, but they gave him a Japanese American first assistant. So that was their little nod to Noguchi. He's never had his story told before. Even though we don't even have the manuscript in yet, we just signed a co-production agreement with Rideback Entertainment, whose founder, Dan Lin, just became chairman of film at Netflix. And they want to co-produce a TV series with us. And, we have no experience doing TV shows or film. They came to us and wanted to do this stories. There are things that are happening that are on a different scale than what we imagined when we first started. So here's a book that's coming out on June 4th. It's called Edison by Pallavi Dixit. It's a epic novel, Bollywood inspired, about a love story that happens in the Indian American community of Edison, New Jersey, which is one of the largest South Asian cultural hubs in the world outside of India. And the mayor of Edison has now chosen this book as a one city, one book selection. So now everyone in Edison is going to be reading it. We're collaborating with the library, with the bookstores, with the businesses all along Oak Tree Road, all the Indian American businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, and the mayor's office to have this book read by as many people as possible. We have Amazon and Audible coming in as corporate partners in this to help make books available to the community. So just stuff that's going on that it's enthusiasm for what we're doing and how we're doing it that are just really extraordinary. So we couldn't be happier or more grateful for the great attention that we've gotten.
That's fabulous. Eve says, congratulations.
Thank
Well,
you.
that's amazing.
Very, very small operation. There are only 3 of us full time, but then we have an army of freelancers and consultants, especially on the marketing and PR front. So when I say we're a general interest publisher, that means we will publish anything and everything. So, our first 4 books are a middle grade graphic novel, first volume of 3 telling AAPI history, written by a best-selling comic book writer for Marvel and DC named Amy Chu. And this is co-published with the Asian American Foundation. So that was our first book. And then our second book was a romance novel called Pride and Preston Lynn. And this is a contemporary adaptation of Pride and Prejudice that takes place in the Asian American community in the Bay Area. And just a little aside about this, you'd think publishing romance is not so serious, but for us, it was a political act because romance is by far the largest fiction category in terms of sales in America. And yet only 11% of romance novels are written by Black and brown people. So our country's 42, 43% non-white, and yet only 11% of our romance novels are written by Black and brown folks. And so what happens is that, especially with Asian Americans, we almost never have a romantic male lead in films, in TV, in novels that are fully Asian. And so for us, it was a political act to publish this book. And in fact, the author, who's she's Chinese American, married to a Caucasian, she has mixed race kids, and she has seen them sometimes struggle to feel, at home, either among Caucasians or among Asian Americans. And so she made her Darcy character a Asian character, and we asked her to change him to fully Asian American because we very specifically wanted to publish a book in which the romantic male lead was fully Asian. Crazy Rich Asians, in the book, the protagonist is fully Asian. And in the film, he was cast as it's a Asian, Henry Golding, who was cast. And so white adjacency is what is considered attractive, is what's considered desirable. And Asian American men are, we're emasculated. We're never allowed to occupy our bodies and to own our sexuality. And so for us, publishing this book, which is a fabulous, clean, wholesome read, by the way, for us, it was a political act. We then published this book that came out just yesterday. This is a picture book called What in the World is Ezra's Art? And this book is really emblematic of what we're trying to do, which is that we are trying to create stories from an Asian American perspective, but are universal. They can be enjoyed by any and all readers. It's not just Asian American readers who can read these books. And this book, ultimately, Ezra, he's quote unquote bad at art, but he loves making art. He feels different. He feels good. He feels warm and fuzzy when he creates, except no one can understand his art. Even his parents are not necessarily all that supportive. And so in the book, we talk about the freedom to create without judgment. And that's a universal story. And we have an educator talking about how if we remove judgment from how we view kids' art, that kids can have that freedom to create without having to worry about how people are going to react to it. So that's a text for the parents at the end of the book. And then Edison is it's our literary novel for the year. And, but again, it's a love letter to a working class immigrant community in New Jersey. And those are the kinds of people that never get their stories told. And so with every story, we're trying to publish books that that we don't know if traditional publishers, the big five publishers, would publish these books because they are always trying to put our authors and our stories in a box, right? The Cooperative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin says that nearly 70% of children's books featuring a major Asian or Asian American character emphasizes the otherness of Asian culture and heritage, right? So our eyes kiss at the corners, whatever the hell that means. Our foods stink, and so we get bullied for it. Our names are unpronounceable. Our parents are tiger parents. We're good at math and science, but we can't be the championship winning, quarterback or the pirate or the adventurer or the astronaut. The heroic characters that white characters are always allowed to inhabit, Asian American characters are still not allowed to do that, right?
Charles, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop you for a second because I think Alma has a comment or a question.
I have a Asian American women's book club, and we read a lot of, it's called the Bento Book Club.
Mm-hmm.
And we read books by non-white authors about non-white cultural situations.
Mm-hmm.
And we go to restaurants that feature the food of the culture that we eat, are reading about. But I don't know anything about, this is the first time I've ever really had any education about how the world of publishing operates.
I mean, this is what's crazy though, right? Books are a pillar of every civilization, have been for thousands of years, right? And yet, unless you work in publishing, no one has the foggiest idea how publishing works, how people get chosen to be published, what they get paid, how their books are designed or printed, how many copies get printed and why, how their books end up on Amazon, how their books are marketed and promoted and sold, how the books are distributed, how much money they make from the books that are sold, etc. All these things that affect the success of a writer are just completely unknown to us, and we don't ask questions, I think. And I think they depend on us to not ask questions. And they depend on authors to not ask questions. Authors are just given this impression that, you're supposed to sit in front of a typewriter and you get a big stack of blank white paper, and all of a sudden you're supposed to have the great American novel. And then you sit back and then the publisher does everything and you should just be happy for what they give you. When in fact, what they actually want is they want authors who feel empowered and they have agency to sell their books, to promote themselves, to publicize themselves. And in fact, you have to bring that to the table in order for them to even consider buying your book. And so it's a process that's really broken. There are over 2 million books that are self-published every single year because there is such a thirst for people to share their stories. The average self-published book sells under 70 copies. So, when you sell it to your friends and family, and after that, what are you supposed to do? How do you get your book out there? There's so much white noise out there, right? Authors can connect with us by going to our website and submitting. We have a submission portal. It is absolutely our policy that anyone and everyone can submit books to us for consideration, and we will get back to every single person. It might take us a while because right now our inbox is really, really full. And my co-founder, Stephanie Lim, and I both have to love a book in order for us to debate and figure out which books to buy. But but we do promise to get back eventually to every single person and give them an answer, yes or no. And if we can't help them, if we can't publish them, then as much as possible, we try to help people make connections, navigate the industry. When I say it's all who you know, I don't mean you need to know famous and powerful people. I mean, you have to be part of a community where people help each other. And that's what we recommend to folks.
Charles, I wondered do you want to talk about the Asian American Book Club that you just launched on May the 13th?
So the Asian American Book Club, Third State is for supporting Asian American writers so that they can tell their authentic truth and see people that look like them throughout the entire process of publishing. At the same time, there are way more Asian American readers, and they are completely ignored by the publishing industry. The publishing industry does not think about Asian American readers. In the meantime, Asian Americans graduate four-year college programs at about 65% of Asian American adults graduate from a four-year college. Study after study has shown that four-year college graduates buy more books and they read more books. And so we, as a group, we should be catered to by the publishing industry, but they don't. Black and brown writers, they have to cater to white readers because their white agents and their white editors and their white marketers tell you that when they close their eyes, the ideal reader for them is some white lady in Kenosha, Wisconsin that doesn't know any black and brown people. So they have to take their stories and not necessarily whitewash them, but they need to adjust their stories because the people that are working on these books demand that they appeal to people that don't look like them. But they never ask white writers to do the same thing. They've never asked a white writer to say, you know what, there are black and brown readers that you need to appeal to with your story. That has literally never happened in the history of publishing. And so Asian American readers are sort of left out in the cold. In the meantime, according to surveys, we are nearly twice as likely as the next ethnic group, which is whites, to buy a book based on a professional or personal recommendation. So word of mouth is really important in our community. And so the Asian American Book Club is going to, we want to create a safe space. We have an actual physical space in downtown Brooklyn where we do author events. We just did a wellness workshop, which was really well attended, a beautiful event with two leading Asian American therapists. We want to do events there where we just create a safe space for anyone who wants to talk about these books and these authors to come in and feel safe. And after COVID and anti-Asian hate, Asian Americans more than ever, we really need to feel safe in our community. And so that's what we want to do in person. And then eventually we want to create these spaces online. So you'll be seeing online live streaming. You'll see video and audio content through the book club. And we partner with the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, which administers the Asian American Literature Awards, the most prestigious award for Asian American writers. And we also partner with the Asian American Writers Workshop, which is the largest writing organization for Asian Americans in the country. And so they are helping us not only choose the books for our book club, but they're also going to be facilitating book group discussions and other events and things like that. So we just want to prioritize Asian American readers. We want to, and their allies. We want to give people a place where they can find other people who have read the books that they've read and just be able to talk about them in a safe space. So we just had this wellness workshop with these two of the most prominent Asian American therapists, Dr. Jenny Wang, who wrote the first book written by an Asian American mental health professional specifically for the AAPI community in the 150-year history of self-help and mental health books. She wrote the very first one. And Sahej Kohli, Indian American brown girl therapy on Instagram, she has just also published a book. And so the two of them led a workshop where it wasn't this just kind of, people sit and they watch these people talk. It was a real workshop where people were talking and answering questions and speaking with each other openly and with vulnerability. It was a really beautiful event. And that's just sort of what we're trying to do. But really, to support us is really word of mouth. People buy books based on other people's recommendations. So please tell people about Third State Books. Please tell people about the books that we're publishing. Please tell people about the Asian American Book Club, and just really think about the way that we spend dollars and the way that we spend our time, and what we talk about with people, that we can do it with intentionality to uplift our community and to uplift other communities. It's not just for Asian Americans, but really for all of our communities that we want to do this with.
It's fabulous, Charles. It's what you're doing is so inspiring, and also so needed.
We've had now 7 states plus New York City public schools that have passed mandates to teach AAPI history, and yet the big 3 education publishers and the big 5 publishers have not lifted a finger to fulfill those mandates. They don't make books on Asian American history. They don't make textbooks on Asian American history. My daughter, who's graduating from high school in June, she's been in gifted and talented programs from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, and she has not had a single textbook on Asian American history. In New York City, which is 18% Asian American. It's intentional what's happening. The way that I explain this is history is told by the winners. And so if white folks prevent Black folks and brown folks from telling their history from their perspective, then they can control how that story is told, how history is told. They can say, we are the experts on whatever topic it is. We are the best-selling writers. We are the best writers. We are the award-winning writers, et cetera, right? And so that's why we need to engage more deeply with publishing, by writing books, by supporting other writers. We need to come together as a community and say, this is important to us, and we're going to prioritize this. And I think that's that's something that I think it's really, once you think about it, and once you realize, oh wait, this is a thing that I can contribute to, then it's easy to do so.
What I appreciate, one of the things I appreciate, and then I'm going to ask other people to chime in here, but one of the things that you said is it's intentional. And I think until we realize that it's systemic and organizational and intentional, we will always say it's that they don't know or that we should do more. But once you have a sense that it's intentional and systemic, there are other ways to engage. So I appreciate you saying that. I'm going to start with Delia. Delia, what'd you learn? What's the inspiration, the reflection? What'd you get from this session?
I sort of hadn't ever really thought that deeply about sort of what the process is in terms of publishing houses and agents and all of that. So I think learning about just sort of the lack of representation there is really important to me. And I think also I appreciate that you're not building sort of a carbon copy that just happens to be Asian American. I think that is something that's fundamentally like really important, is that you're building something different. It is sort of fundamentally different in its values and how you operate. And I think seeing that is really inspiring, right? Because like sometimes I think by default, sometimes, I feel like you just sort of think you need to do what other people are doing, to kind of give voice, to our community, but it really isn't about that. It's about breaking the mold and doing something that really does truly like uplift our community. So I'm really appreciative for all of like the thinking that you're doing through that.
Is international distribution perfect in any way? No, not necessarily, but they should be available through your normal channels. If you go into a bookstore in Germany or in the Middle East or India, you can ask for the books and they can order the books for you if they don't have them in the store. So, in fact, I would love your help in figuring out how we could get a Hindi edition published in India, because there are 100 Bollywood songs, films, and actors that are referenced in this, because the woman I can't call her anything but a scholar of Bollywood. And there are, in fact, some Bollywood superstars that make a cameo in the book at the end of the book, in the story. I won't say more than that, but There should be an entire audience in India that can read it in the English language or could read it in Hindi and other translated languages. So we're, at the book club, we're doing all kinds of different collaborations, coming up with different memberships, partnerships, sponsorships with, Amazon and Audible are now corporate partners. We're going to, the two therapists that I told you about, we're going to get them up to Cornell to do an Asian American mental health workshop or lecture or fireside chat. And then the mental health services there will help buy a certain number of books, which then can be distributed to the to the students. There should be universities and colleges that also want to work at getting these books into their library, getting these books into their Asian American Studies programs, whatever it is, to help support Asian American students who might want to write. If they don't see themselves reflected in the books that they have available to them, they're never going to think that that's possible for them. Right? If you look at the starting salaries for publishing folks, at the assistant level, first of all, you're forced to do 3 or 4 unpaid internships in the most expensive city in America in order to, or the second most expensive city in America, before you can ever get an assistant job. And that assistant job, I just saw a full publicist job, not assistant publicist, not publicity intern, a full-time, 5 days a week, no hybrid, not remote, nothing, in-person publicist job starting at $42,000. That's in New York City in 2024. And so if you don't come from money, if you don't have wealth, if you don't have a trust fund, if you don't have wealthy parents who can subsidize your living in New York, it's really, really hard to continue working in publishing. There's a really great Instagram account called XOXO Publishing with 3 G's. XOXO Publishing GGG. And it's like Gossip Girl, but for the publishing industry. And the toxicity, the ableism, the patriarchy, the racism, just chewing people up and spitting people out that the publishing industry does. And it's like this, of course, for many industries, but publishing, we have this impression that, editors and publishers are genteel people and we're nice people because we work in books, but it's an extremely toxic place to work, and especially if you're being paid, a third of what you might make in some other industry, and you have to commute an hour and a half each way just to get to your office. And this is why there is a lack of Black and brown people also and poor white people in publishing, because they can't afford to. And that's why they don't know anyone that has made it, because there are so few people that have really stayed in publishing and made it to the top. And so the impression is we just don't work there.
Charles, we are rapidly coming to a close here. I wanted to read what Eve said. She said, I want to say, wow, I learned so much tonight from you, Charles. What an incredible project you have founded, a movement, really. And thank you. I look forward to supporting and spreading the word.
And you're all the best for sticking through the whole thing.
Well, it's so interesting, and you have these facts, and you gave us a vivid picture of the industry, and then what you're doing to make a difference in that industry. So it's also inspiring to listen to you, to see what you've done, to share your knowledge and just everything that you've done. So thank you so much for this.
It's been my absolute pleasure, and and privileged to talk to everyone here. It's just, I just want to publish books that I'm proud to publish, you know. And at MoMA, we published 52 books a year. I managed a $4.5 million budget and staff of 14, and all we did was just make expensive books for rich folks. It was soul crushing to do that, and I just, you know, love making books that I know people, kids, families, parents, educators are going to read and say, wow, I'm really glad I was able to, you know, to read this and share it with people, because I just want to give people books that, you know, where they see themselves, you know, properly and genuinely reflected.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it, Charles. You, even though you're modest about it, you are starting a movement, and we thank you so much for the work you've done. And we will try to get this in many different places and channels so that people can listen and watch the interview and the group process here. So thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah.